Good morning, grade 7. Today we're back to talk about our second part of the uh, given poem, The Charge of the Light Brigade. Before I start with the second part, let me remind you of the most important notes that we discussed previously. The very first important note is the meaning of the narrative poem. As I told you previously, grade 7, narrative poem is the poem that tells a story and has all of the story elements such as characters, setting, plot, conflict, and so on. Let me remind you of the characters here. We're talking about the troop of the British Army and the troop of the Russian Army. These are the characters in this story. As for the setting, it happened in the valley called the Valley of Death. Most of the story happened in the battlefield, which was located in the Death of Valley. Here, as for events or sequence of events, the poem opens with describing the Light Brigade. Brigade, let me remind you that the brigade is, as I told you previously, is a military unit, consists of 600 soldiers. This brigade or this unit was given an order by their leader to keep riding toward lowlands. What does lowlands mean? Lowlands mean the valley, which was called the Valley of Death, as I told you previously. The leader gave them the order to keep riding toward the valley until they seize their enemy. Who was their enemy? The enemy was the Russian firearms. Then, if we move to event 2, or in the middle of the poem, what happened here? The Light Brigade was attacked. As the cannons, we're talking about the cannons of the Russian army, sound, the British army bravely fight using their swords. They were riding the horsebacks and they were using their swords. After a while, the British Army realized which means the Light Brigade realized that they can't withstand. What does withstand mean? They can't continue, they can't face, they can't stand in front of the Russian army, since the Russian army was more powerful than them. So they can't withstand anymore. Because they lost a lot of their horses, a lot of those soldiers. Some of the horses were wounded, some of them were lifeless, as well as the soldiers were wounded and were lifeless on the ground, which means they lost a lot of their soldiers and a lot of their horses in the battlefield, and it was an indicator that they're going to lose this turn. So as a result, what happened to the British Army? Of course, after all of these, they had lost this turn or this battle in front of the Russian army. Unfortunately, I have to remind you, it was a war between Russia and England. Guys, you need to know that in this battle, the British had lost the battle. The battle happened in the Valley of Death. But at the end of the war, they won. So they only lost this turn, this battle. One of the most important things to focus on while we're explaining the poem is the theme. Let me remind you, what does the theme mean? The theme means the message that even the poet or the writer or the author needs to deliver. Themes here, we have more than one most important ideas to indicate the theme. The first one, we're talking about the courage of the soldiers. Here we're indicating that all of the soldiers were brave enough to fight, were brave enough to defend their country. The second theme, we're discussing the confusion, the terror in a war. You know these things. As the third form, we're talking also about the heroism, excitement of the soldiers. How did they fight in the battlefield? What happened to them? To what extent they were brave, and so on. These all of the information that I need you to know during this week. So I need to remind you, British only, the British Army or the British Brigade only lost this turn, but at the end, when they're done with their battles, they won the war against Russia, and so on. Thank you very much for paying attention and listening.